Okay, good morning, everybody. This is John Haller. We're doing a special Israel update with my good friend Danny Seaman, live from Israel. Danny, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And hang on a second here. I'm getting some feedback. Okay. So, Danny, uh, in the past couple times we've talked, and I guess it's been almost 2 months since we talked on air. But you had mentioned your daughter's friend from the IDF, Nama Levy, and she was released in the hostage release last week. Can you just kind of give me your thoughts on how I know that this is a very big thing with you because of your friendship with her and the family? Can you just kind of give us your thoughts on seeing her released and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's obviously we've come to know most of these hostages that were taken, especially the younger ones. And in our particular case, with Naama Levy, she was with my daughter in a pre-military school for the year before the war broke out. So for us, it was very personal. And I admit that at times when I saw Naama, I would see my own daughter. And it became such a thing that anytime you see them, it was very personal for all of us in Israel. So we're all very happy, regardless of reservations that we may have about the agreement that was reached and then how they were released and the dangers that could be what we may, it's not may, we will have to address the dangers that these people that we released in return, that they pose to us. And already, by the way, of those released in last year's arrangement and in the recent weeks, already 33 of them have been apprehended again by Israeli security because they've engaged in terrorism again. So it's quite clear that we're going to have to deal with this. But in this particular case, yes, it was very emotional. It's very, very relieving in a way, because we also are hearing some feedback. It wasn't very pleasant, but they were amazing, these young women, the way they stood up to their captors, the way they were able to maneuver inside this very difficult situation. But now they're home and everything, and now they're in a period of being helped. This is an unusual and a unique situation. And psychologists here say that there's no other example in the world with what we're dealing with here. And they're just going along with it and letting these hostages tell them how they feel about it. I can tell you that today the young women were released. Some of them decided to go home. Others preferred to go to a resort where they can get themselves together. It'll take a while. But at least now they're in Israel, they're safe, and we can only hope that this continues with the other hostages and that they'll be released as soon as possible.
Okay, well, that's good news. And if we have time at the end today, we may talk a little bit about as you just mentioned, 33 of those released from prison have already been apprehended. And I saw, and Danny, I don't understand this. I saw a video by a real estate person in Israel, talking about some condominiums that are being built down along Route 60 in the, and I'll always use the term scare quotes, Palestinian area that will be occupied by some of these guys being released. It's insane. So maybe we can talk about, if we have sometime when we have time, about the logic of releasing these guys in any event.
No, the logic is simple. It's simple. On October 7th, we lost. And now we're paying the consequences of that defeat that we suffered on that day. Not going into everything that we've done since then, but this is a consequence of what occurred on that day. And like I said, there's a debate in Israel. We're concerned, but at the same time, we're all very happy to see, and this is an obligation that the government of Israel has towards these Israelis and towards their families. And we can just hope for the best. That the reason we've gathered here today is to discuss these tectonic changes that are upon us. So who knows? Maybe the past won't repeat itself. I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry.
See, the
This
past
morning,
can't repeat itself. You were muted.
yeah,
Danny.
I need you to be my producer here. So so we were texting back and forth about 3 or 4 a.m. my time this morning about doing this, and I think the term you used was that what had happened in Washington, D.C. at the White House yesterday during the Trump and Netanyahu news conference, the term you used were biblical proportions. So why don't you tell me
It's
what
appropriate to where we're at. So
I know. So why don't you just kind of unpack that a little bit for us about, what your thoughts are, what you saw, what you understand, and as I was asking people as we were texting back and forth last night, what the heck just happened? And so why don't you kind of unpack and run with that a little bit?
I think what we're seeing happening is what's happening a lot in the United States right now is that common sense is prevailing. It's as simple as that. For so long, we've been caught up in this madness of believing that if we cater to terrorists, if we make concessions to terrorists, we'll have this wonderful conclusion. And this could happen between two normal democratic nations that uphold the sanctity of life. But when you have an element that wants to annihilate you, you can't negotiate with them. It's madness. It's sheer madness. Now, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I started working on the behalf of the state of Israel back 40 years ago already. And I remember at that time, back in the 80s, that we were told constantly that if we recognize the PLO, then the PLO were the extreme terrorist organization. If we recognize the PLO, we'll have peace. If we cede territory, we'll have peace. Now, over the past 40 years, we did exactly, precisely those two things. We recognized the PLO, we ceded territory, we allowed them to move in, and not only have we not had peace, things have become much worse until we reached the point, which is a consequence of the Oslo agreements, was the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the more extreme organization, the Hamas, taking over. But then we had the consequence, and we were very fortunate on October 7th that it was only the Hamas that invaded Israel, because we know today that there was a plan that was being conducted by the Iranians, that there would be an invasion of Israel, both by Hamas and by Hezbollah. For whatever reason, this did not happen, and only Hamas invaded Israel at that time, and we were able to stop them and defeat them, and then conduct the war against these other elements from a much better standpoint without them being an invading Israeli territory. So what we saw here is that over the past few years, all these attempts on our part, and it's not only that, it's also the constant, even every time that agreements were violated, whether by Hezbollah in Lebanon, and which was guaranteed by the United States, the UN, and the Europeans. Oslo was being violated and was guaranteed by the United States. The Egyptians, by the way, are now violating the Camp David Accords that the United States is a guarantor towards. So every time these violations occur, and every time Israel is attacked by missile attack, and we had these different rounds over the past 20 years since leaving the Gaza Strip, and we left the Gaza Strip completely. And there were hundreds of billions of dollars invested in Gaza. None of it went to the benefit of their society. It went for developing and building military installation, turning all of Gaza into a military base against Israel. And over these years, every time pressure was applied to Israel, the finger was pointed at Israel. Maybe initially, just like with October 7th, world countries and organizations understood Israel's response, but very quickly, within a week or so, they were applying pressure to Israel, not to Hamas, not to the PLO, not to Hezbollah, not to others. Where in the world does this happen? When a country is attacked, that the country that is attacked is required to restrain itself. And if it takes action against those attacking it, it's criticized. No country in the world has more responsibility to the citizens of the enemy than those who control that area itself. Any location used and they keep quoting international law against us, any location used to attack a civilian population in another country is a legitimate military target. They've done that against us in Lebanon, they've done it against us in Judea and Samaria, and they did it against us in Gaza. And they used hospitals, schools, it's all documented. We're not making this stuff up. The media knows about this. It's all been confirmed. Yet when Israel retaliates against this, we're the ones who are required to restrain ourselves. So what you had happen over the past 30 years since Oslo is that the international community gave these extreme elements the legitimacy to violate and put their own civilians in danger instead of taking them to task and requiring that they abide not only by international law, by the agreements that were signed. So this is where the situation that we're in. What happened in Washington is following this assault on Israel back on October 7th, and now the entire change of the Middle East. Israel has, and Netanyahu, it's not only by chance, it's not only because he's the prime minister of Israel that he's being honored and respected in Washington. Following the measures and the actions that Israel took, we completely changed and shifted the Middle East today. What we're seeing is history developing right in front of us, unfolding in front of our eyes. You have historic events happening. And Israel was able to take out on 7 different fronts these enemies that were trying, and admittedly, they're not hiding anything. They're telling us exactly what they want to do. They want to annihilate us. And yet we were able to destroy them, take them out of the picture, eliminate many of the threats. And in Washington, D.C., the understanding of the failures of the past, of the threat that extreme elements in Islamic Arab society, the extreme elements, the threat that they are towards Israel and towards world peace, has finally come to a realization and a conclusion that what happened before, the world before October 7th, is not the world that we're dealing in today. And you can no longer appease these extreme elements, and they have to be dealt with and have to be addressed. Part of it, a consequence of the actions that Israel took. Now, the actions of Israel took, despite the fact that some people are trying to paint this as we were taking out revenge against the Arabs in Gaza. No, we were eliminating the threat. And the threat to Israel was in every home, every neighborhood, every building, every school, every hospital was a military facility. They had arms, they had explosives, they had tunnels underneath, that a terrorist walking around in civilian clothing, which, by the way, is a violation of international law itself, them going from one place to the other, knew exactly where to go in the children's bedrooms and find weapons there that they can use against the Israelis. So it left us no choice but to take out every one of these installations so they can't be used against us again. The consequence of this is the Gazans really have nowhere to go back to. They allowed their homes. It's not that they didn't know. It's not that they were surprised themselves. They knew exactly. And when you see upon the release now of the hostages and prisoners that we sent to them, terrorists that we apprehended and released back to Gaza, the celebrations in which they are receiving these people, and they say, these are heroes, we're going to continue with it. Now, after October 7th, we listen to what they're saying. We don't deny that they are serious and sincere and they want to annihilate us. So we're not going to let them do that anymore. And now, physically, they actually have nowhere to go back to in Gaza. So what the United States and Israel are doing right now is the understanding that you have to make tectonic changes in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East and address the failures, not only since Oslo, but these are the failures since 1948, when the United Nations recognized an Arab right to a state and a Jewish right to the state. The Jews accepted it, took whatever we were given. The Arabs rejected it. But which is their right. They're allowed to, what they were not allowed to do was to use military force to try to annihilate Israel. And even though we've signed in the past 76 years treaties with Egypt and with Jordan, the Arab world itself still wants to annihilate the state of Israel, regardless of what's happened over the past 76 years. So this can't happen anymore. There has to be an end to it. And you start by letting the terrorists in Gaza know that their time is over. This is finished. And that's what the essence of what the meeting and what the consequence of the meeting was yesterday.
So where do you think this all goes? Because this is a very, as we've talked about this among some of my friends, it's like nobody had this on our Mideast bingo card for this week, that Trump would sort of float this particular kind of idea about the U.S. taking control of Gaza for a time. And Trump is a negotiator, so I assume that this is part of a negotiation. But how does this go forward? I saw an interview and I've seen some things. There's a new group called Abraham Shield, I think it is, that kind of comes out of the INSS group up at one of the universities. I saw an interview with a former member of Knesset named, I don't know how to say her name, Dr. Einat Wilf.
Not Will. She's a serious person. She was with the Labor Party. She's one of the old Labor Party, which were very Zionistic and concerned about the state of Israel, not those today who believe in all this nonsense of world peace, etc.
Yeah, and I see that, like, she and the people at this new Abraham Shield group sort of give passing reference to a two-state solution. So let's walk through that. I mean, how do you see this unfolding, at least from where you sit? What's going to happen? Two-state, this,
you're using yesterday's, literally, not literally yesterday's, right, but old speak. I mentioned before, the world has changed. The Middle East has changed. Too many people are still caught up in the same resolutions and concepts of the past. This is all over. It's erased. There will never be two states. There will not be a two-state solution to this. The Palestinians have shown themselves to not being capable and having no interest of residing in an independent state. They want to annihilate Israel. And just look at all the demonstrators, those supporting them. What are they chanting? From the river to the sea. They want to eliminate Israel. So with all due respect to them, they can go screw themselves, because we're not going to roll over and die. When we said never again, this is what we meant. And it's hard for them to accept that. Now, for too many years, they had the opportunity of the two-state solution. Not only did they not follow through on it, they tried to use it to annihilate us. So that's over. Now, there are other things happening in the world. You have an administration here which realizes the American role in the world. And anybody who wants to have real peace in the world, wants to have liberal Judeo-Christian values running the world, wants the United States to govern the world. Now, you can go on in all this woke nonsense of how the United States is terrible. No country in the world is perfect. But I'd much rather have the Americans running things, as history has shown us, than any other people in the world. And this is what is, like I said before, common sense is prevailing. This administration is an administration of common sense. And common sense means you fight your enemies, you defeat them, and you stand by your allies. And this is what they're doing. And if there's change happening in the world right now, the United States understands that elements like Russia and China and the extreme Islam, by the way, which is supported today by Qatar, who are an American ally. The Americans have to address the threat and the conniving that is being done by Qatar. But that's the next stage. Right now, what is happening is this. The United States is reestablishing itself as the main leader and main power in the world. This slap in the face that the Americans received in this whole concept of, which is the future of the economy and the future, which is AI, and seeing how China was able to take itself to new levels. The Americans are addressing that right now. And this also is a benefit that Israel is enjoying, because what people didn't notice, that the other thing happening was that the United States signed very elaborate economic deals with Israel. Whereas in this whole area of AI, they will be putting money into research in Israel, and Israel will become the research and development for the Americans on this topic, because they're aware of our abilities. Just like in the battlefield, just like in the war, that anything that Israel developed here, we shared our knowledge and our experience with the United States. All these things that were done in the war in the past 15 months are being shared, and some very, very amazing things have occurred. All this knowledge that we gathered with new technologies that were applied in the battlefield, it's all being shared with the United States. So the Americans are benefiting from that. But they also understand that we have what to offer to the United States economic-wise. So they've signed these agreements, and this is part of what is happening in the change occurring here. The change occurring here is something that they operated and worked upon in the previous Trump administration, which were the Abrahamic Accords, trying to create this bridge from the East, India, the Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, etc., to Europe, to provide them not only with oil, but also with goods, etc. And the idea was to create a port. From the beginning of this war, it was quite clear that when the war is over, Gaza will be that port of exports. The thing that changed yesterday was that now the United States is not leaving this just to randomly occur out of the goodwill of the elements here, which means Israel, Saudi Arabia, etc. The United States is taking responsibility for that. And that's what Trump meant by saying the United States will take control of Gaza. They will take control once Gaza is prepared to move to the next step, which is becoming that port of export for the Arab world, for the Middle East, to Europe. This will provide jobs. This will provide a lot for the people involved in that. It will provide jobs for the Egyptians in the Sinai, which is just close to Gaza. But once Israel eliminates the threat of Hezbollah, of Hamas, in this case of Gaza, then you can start moving to the next stage. Since Gaza is uninhabitable at the moment, that means that immense changes are going to happen there. The Gazan population will be moved to other locations. Gaza there'll be an American effort to rebuild the Gaza and build that economic element within the Gaza Strip. And the presence of Americans there will promise that terrorists will no longer return. You don't need American troops. Israel will take care of the security aspect. The Americans will build that future economic base, which is Gaza. Will the Americans eventually have a military presence there? I do believe so. And that will become the biggest American military base, not against Gaza, but for American forces in the Middle East. And I think this is also an indication of them saying to Qatar that, look, you benefit from our presence. The biggest American base right now in the Middle East is in Qatar. And if the Qatarians don't change their behavior and stop funding extremist Islam and jihadist Islam, the Americans will move out of there. And there'll be sanctions against Qatar as well. But if we go back to Gaza right now, this is all part of this bigger picture occurring right now and the changes that we are to expect in the Middle East. You can forget the concepts of the past, 2 states, peace, that's not happening anymore. It's all going to be economic based, which serves the interests, first and foremost, of the United States. It positions the United States as the world leader. The war in the Ukraine did not bode well for the Russians because it exposed them to not being the superpower they wanted to present themselves as being. So I believe here Trump will put out a hand to the Russians to allow them to end this battle with some respect and to be part of this economic change occurring here in the Middle East. I believe that'll be the next step. Don't pay attention right down to the noise coming out of the Arab world. They have to say the things that they say. They have to appease their public. They're going to say what they have to say, but eventually they'll all fall in line with this because it does benefit them and it does benefit their societies. So I do believe that this whole plan, which is part of the greater changes occurring here, will eventually come down and be more successful than the nonsense we dealt with in the past 30 years of recognizing each other, sitting together, singing Kumbaya, my Lord. When you can't do that, human history has proven that's not the way things work.
So, Danny, what do Israelis want to see happen to Gaza? I mean, there's a couple million people there. Everybody is displaced. Trump was correct that the thing is just an absolute disaster area. And he's going to push. I think he's going to push Egypt and Jordan. I'm seeing reports that Egypt has put a lot of military equipment on the border, because I don't think they want them either. You know and I know Jordan doesn't want them.
Listen, Jordan, if I may remind you, back in
Sure.
1970, you had the Palestinian refugees in Jordan. In 1970, there was a coup against the king in Jordan, Black September, and Jordan kicked out the PLO. They moved to Lebanon. Within 4 years, there was a civil war in Lebanon, which was instigated by the presence of the PLO there. So the Arabs know that anytime you have the Palestinian present, their whole raison d'etre, their whole existence, is not to create a Palestinian state, but to create upheaval in the Middle East. They were created by the Soviet Union with the single purpose of creating that upheaval in the Middle East against Israel and American allies. So it's, of course, it's reasonable for these countries not to have them there. If you remember, if it was Kuwait back in the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, the Palestinians who were employees in Kuwait cooperated with the Iraqis against, and Kuwait expelled them afterwards. So any place they're present, they cause local upheaval. So it's quite clear that they may not want it. But as I said, the world right now is different, and there are ways of addressing these issues that could be, at least now, and let's remember, we're talking about, Gaza is about the size of Manhattan and New York City, and all its different boroughs. The Arab world, if you take just Egypt and Jordan themselves, but if you add Libya, Tunisia, locations in Syria, others, they're about half the size of the United States. So they have these areas and left as areas that are uninhabited, that they can move them there. So there are options that are available if they're serious about this. But we always know that the Palestinian issue was always first and foremost the way that the Arabs continued their battle to undermining Israel and delegitimizing the state of Israel. They have to understand that this is no longer acceptable.
Yeah, it's is it safe to say that the best conclusion is that this is part of Trump's way of negotiating something with regard to how the immediate term thing is going to work out with the people that are still moving back and forth through Gaza, and to rebuild it? Let me ask you this: what would the feeling be of Israelis if the deal ended up being rebuild Gaza and bring all these people back? How is Israel going to react to that?
We don't have to react. I think that a lot of people are saying a lot of nonsense right now. Look, first off, of course, there's plans and then there's realities. A lot of things can change. You never know what could change. But if we say things will be, that's why you have to be a bit more, not skeptical, but when you're doing this, understanding that you don't jump at everything out. Today, the head of the opposition in Israel said that he's going to go to the United States, the same person who didn't want to meet with Trump before last time he was president because he thought he was an illegitimate candidate. He wants to come to Trump. They're not going to even accept him. He's such a fool. But he wants to show other elements and aspects of this. These people should shut up. They've caused enough damage over the years with their concepts of peace. They should let the mature grown-ups handle things the way it's supposed to be handled. So I'm being a bit facetious right now, but seriously, it's going to take a while to rebuild Gaza. By that time, those who are going, and by the way, every war in the world, you have populations who are uprooted. Every war, major war, you have that happening. People always talk about the Palestinian refugees. None of them speak about the 1 million Jewish refugees who lived for over 1,000 years in Arab countries, who were uprooted after the 48 war and had to come live in Israel. That's never mentioned. And everywhere in the world, refugees are recognized for a short period of time, never the second generation. With the Arabs, it goes, they're inherited now by the great-grandchildren of those who were refugees in 1948. So this constantly perpetuating the Arab misery, the Palestinian Arab misery, is disgusting, and it's despicable. All these human rights groups who want to keep these Arabs in their misery, they never did a thing to prevent the leaders of these Palestinians, whether it's PLO or Hamas, from abusing their people, keeping them in poverty, building these military installations in their homelands, in their homes, etc. These human rights groups never did, and media, by the way, as well, never did a thing against them. And then after these people suffer the consequences of the actions of their leaders, they want to continue perpetuating their misery. For whatever reasons, there's a lot of money involved, a lot of money. USAID was one of those who was responsible for perpetuating the Palestinian misery in the Middle East. So what this administration is doing is putting an end to that farce as well. And it's about time that people treated the Arabs, if they so care about the Palestinians, treat them with the same dignity which you give, just for example, the Ukrainian refugees. Over 1 million people left the Ukraine. I think it's more than 1 million. Left the Ukraine during the war there, accepted in Europe and other locations in Israel as well. This happens in every place. When the civil war in Syria, millions of refugees were absorbed in Europe. Why aren't they accepting and why aren't they allowing the same benefits to the Arabs in Gaza and perhaps also in Judea and Samaria as it's happening right now, because there's a terrorist element there that we're now addressing. While we have this ceasefire in Gaza, we're addressing the threat that is rising in Jenin and in Tulkarem in Judea and Samaria. So what is going to happen is these people will be treated just like refugees and like displaced people in any other conflict area, will be absorbed elsewhere. And then when the time comes, when things are rebuilt, they'll be offered the opportunity of returning. I doubt that many of them will. From the Israeli perspective, we want to end the control of the Hamas there. We do not want a Palestinian Authority controlling Gaza in any situation. We want to remove the threat of Hezbollah in Lebanon. We want to remove the Iranian threat. By the way, Trump is now trying to use other means of restraining the Iranians. But if they don't see to that, if they continue, and they have patience, they can play the game. They say to themselves, all right, we'll wait 4 years now. In 4 years, Trump will be out. We're not going to wait that long. We're not going to allow them anymore to continue with the activities. And they're funding right now, they're funding and they're sending money into Syria and into Lebanon to recreate the Hezbollah, and also into Judea and Samaria. So all these things are happening. It's not that the war is over, you have total victory, not only us, for the West, and now we can move into the new world. No, this is, I would say that what was yesterday was more like the Potsdam conference back in World War II, where they're planning what the world is going to look like after the war is over.
Okay. Danny, I know I promised to keep this to a reasonable time, and I know you have some other obligations. Where can people follow you if they're so inclined?
I'm social media, Facebook. I'm close to the 5,000 already, so I can't accept almost more friends. But most of my posts are open to the public, so they can see it there. I don't do Twitter or X or whatever it's called. To me, it's a cesspool. Instagram a little, though. I was shut down once. They're now threatening to shut me down twice because I was very abusive in my conduct on Instagram towards those who are critical of Israel. I'm not very polite, and I don't try to convince them. I give them a piece of my mind.
Well, there's plenty of that going around. By the way, I did link in the show notes today. There is an interview that Danny did yesterday with Moshe Davis at the Israel's Defense and Security Forum. There's a link to that. I'd highly recommend you watch that 30-minute interview. Danny, we'll have to continue this in the future. And if you'll just give me a minute to stop the stream, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side. So everybody, thanks for watching today. I personally have a lot of things coming up. I know I'm doing some things with Olivier Melnick tomorrow, also recording a 1-hour program in the UK with Simon Barrett. And so I'll put links up to that on my social media. Appreciate you watching. Danny, thank you. And I'll say goodbye to you on the other side. Thank you, everyone.